Hello, welcome to the spooky little library. Today we forgot to turn on the lights. So I call it the spooky little library. And today we're going to read Little Miss Trouble. Here comes trouble, people used to say. And who do you think would come walking along? That's right, Little Miss Trouble. Who the trouble she caused. One morning, she went to see Mr. Uppity. Do you know what Mr. Small calls you behind your back? She asked him. No, replied Mr. Uppity. What does Mr. Small call me behind my back? Little Miss Trouble looked at him. Fatty, she said. Now Mr. Uppity didn't like that, not at all. Not one little bit. He went around immediately to see Mr. Small. How dare you call me Fatty, he shouted. But stammered Mr. Small, who had ever called him Fatty? But nothing, shouted Mr. Uppity. And he hit poor Mr. Small. Ouch! He gave him a black eye. Poor Mr. Small. Now, when this is all right, do you think that Mr. Small will get better? Little Miss Trouble, who was hiding behind a tree, hugged herself with glee. Oh, I do like making trouble, she giggled to herself. Naughty girl. That is true. Little Miss Trouble went to see Mr. Clever. Do you know what Mr. Small calls you behind your back? She asked him. No, replied Mr. Clever. Tell me, what does Mr. Small call me behind my back? Little Miss Trouble looked at him. Big Nose, she said. Now, Mr. Clever didn't like that very much either. Off he rushed, and when he found Mr. Small, without waiting for an explanation, he punched him hard. In the other eye, poor Mr. Small, two black eyes for something he'd never done. But look at you, Little Miss Trouble laughed when she saw him. It's all your fault, said Mr. Small. True, she said, and walked off. Poor Mr. Small had to go to the doctor. Good heavens, exclaimed the Dr. Makewell when he saw him. Whatever happened to you? Mr. Small explained. I think Dr. Makewell said when he'd heard what Mr. Small had to tell him, that something should be done about that little lady. What she needs is... Then he stopped, and he chuckled. That's it, he laughed. What's it? Asked Mr. Small, and Dr. Makewell whispered something to Mr. Small. Would you like to know what he whispered? Not telling you, it's a secret. That afternoon, Mr. Small went to see Mr. Tickle. Do you know what Mrs. Trouble calls you behind your back? He asked. No, said Mr. Tickle. What does Mrs. Trouble call me behind my back? Mr. Small looked at him. Pudding face, he said. Then Mr. Small went to Mr. Bump. Do you know what Mrs. Trouble calls you behind your back? He asked. No, said Mr. Bump. What does Mrs. Trouble call me behind my back? Mr. Small looked at him. Mr. Nitwit, he said. Now, he and her are saying bad words. But I think that's the end of it. Well, Miss Trouble was in trouble. How dare you call me Pudding Face, cried Mr. Tickle, and tickled her. And how dare you call me Mr. Nitwit, cried Mr. Bump, and bumped her. Now, I don't know whether you've ever been tickled and bumped at the same time, but it's not much fun. In fact, it's no fun at all. Tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle bump, for 10 minutes. And 10 minutes of tickle bumping is a long time, I can tell you. I'm bad with the pages. Later that evening, Dr. Makewell strolled around to see Mr. Small. How are the eyes? He asked. Oh, much better now, thank you, replied Mr. Small. And did your little plan work? Asked the doctor. It did indeed, grinned Mr. Small. Shake, said Dr. Makewell, and they shook hands. Well, not quite hands. Dr. Makewell then strolled around to see Mrs. Trouble. She was feeling very sorry for herself. What's wrong with you? He asked her, and she told him all about it, all about everything. Dr. Makewell looked at her. Cheer up, he said. You know what you've just had, don't you? No, Miss Trouble shook her head. Oops. A taste of your own medicine, he chuckled, and went home for supper. Thanks for coming to the Little Library and reading Little Miss Trouble.